Welcome in to another edition of the show we currently call the Scoop Live. I'm Tommy Ashley. That, of course, is the reason I'm here, the reason you're here. Mr. Don Callahan with the legendary Inside Carolina sweatshirt on. Don, if you would model that sweatshirt for us, please.
Absolutely.
It says, There is no off season. And here we are on April 26th, talking about North Carolina football recruiting. That is a nonstop 12-month deal. Ton of information on Inside Carolina about portal movements in, out and then back in. If you're Don Chapman, or excuse me, in and then back out if you're Don Chapman, and just a lot of news going on Inside Carolina on the basketball side, the football side. I've been covering some baseball. Baseball's in a critical time as well. So check out Inside Carolina. Of course, Inside Carolina premium stuff. You'll know who Don Callahan is if you don't already. Don is Inside Carolina's football recruiting expert, and I would say probably, well, without question, the best North Carolina football recruiting expert, and without question, near the top of the list for college football recruiting in general. How you like that intro, Don?
I love it. I love it. I don't know if it's true, but before we get into it, I got to apologize. I am slightly under the weather, so I'm going to be using the mute button here and there and drinking lots of water, trying to fight this off as much as possible. So, but we're playing injured here.
I was going to
We're
say
going to
there
fight
are
through it though.
no excuses, no excuses.
That's right.
And I don't want you to infect the mic, but get the mic a little bit closer to you so we can hear that old Philadelphia accent
All right, here we go.
shining through. Don, let's get right into it. We talked about it last week. We did a couple little shorts on YouTube. Pizanski and Patterson, most recent North Carolina commits. If my math is correct, and look, I've never been a math major, don't intend to. Surprised it didn't get me kicked out of Carolina back in the day, but that is 11th and 12th commitments in North Carolina's 2024 recruiting class. Just sort of let's talk about those guys a little bit more. Tell us a little bit about the recruitment of Pizanski and Patterson briefly, and then I want to ask you a couple questions about what needs they feel.
So Pizanski's recruitment, looking back, really started in late January when Oklahoma and North Carolina offered. He went on to take unofficial visits to both schools in March, returned to North Carolina for the spring game, and committed right after the spring game on the football field to Tim Cross. Patterson, somewhat similar. His recruitment, let me just take a step back. So Pizanski actually had a bunch of offers, was on a lot of schools' radars for a while. Patterson just started kind of popping on people's radars this offseason, mostly because he was a wide receiver for much of his career, moved to DB, and started to kind of thrive at that position while playing at one of the better high schools in the Atlanta area. Picked up a bunch of offers in February and visited most of those schools in March. Also visited North Carolina, where he was offered. And then he too returned to UNC for the spring game. He didn't commit during that visit. He left, talked to some more people, and then committed. But basically, that last spring game visit for both of those kids resulted in commitments, even though they both didn't announce it until like a week later, because the way things have kind of happened with recruiting is, one, the kids like to kind of tell the other schools first, and then more than anything else, they're waiting for those commitment edits to be ready.
Yeah. And aside there, how have editing, and I need to get you a silent text notification, or at least get a cool one other than the bell. It sounds like Mario Brothers hitting the rocks. Don, how has that edit process made your job harder, if it has?
I don't know if it's made it harder. It's just changed it a little bit. Because usually we would kind of prepare. Obviously we would get some sort of tips. Okay, this kid is kind of close to making a decision, or you kind of get a feeling like, okay, this kid could potentially pop on the weekend. Now we're kind of finding that they're not announcing during the weekend. You're not announcing when they actually commit. So they're waiting for a specific day to announce their commitment, and that is given us a little bit of time to kind of get everything in order so that we can properly announce, or properly report their commitment. So it kind of sort of helps us in a way. The only thing is that, and I guess it doesn't happen nearly as much as you would think. There is always the concern of these things kind of leaking out beforehand, because we get this information, and it's the one thing I do like about this beat compared to a lot of other sports beats is that there is a respect for the recruit and allowing them to announce it on their own time, give them the spotlight and that sort of thing. And that's great. But there is always the fear you have this information and you don't want to, it doesn't, I know it's kind of selfish, but I don't want to appear to look like I have my pants down when in reality I've had this information, but I'm trying to respect kind of the process that the kid wants to take with everything.
Yeah, and that's a big part of the trust, not only in football recruiting, but also basketball recruiting, especially during the transfer portal time frame. And that's one thing about Inside Carolina, and I'm not tooting a horn that folks don't already know. There's plenty of information known well ahead of time, and it's held and reported on the player timeline, for lack of a better way of putting it, just simply to respect we always hear respect my decision, but to respect their decisions, and maybe to respect, the process and all that. So Don Callahan covering that. When he gets the news, we get it to you as soon as possible. And certainly that's on the Tar Pit Premium message board. Oh, I didn't mention earlier, but Johnny T-Shirt and Johnny T-Shirt sponsor this show. So you guys need to take care of them online if you can't get to Chapel Hill. Don, spinning off the recruitments of Pizanski and Patterson, let's sort of look at you did not do a weekly scoop this week.
I did not.
Which was met roundly with boos on the message boards. And you're used to that. But you provided me with the elevator list. And if folks that are familiar with the scoop understand on the premium boards, understand elevator up and down, players, their recruitments, whether it's up for North Carolina, down for North Carolina. So let's sort of go into the ones you dropped to me this morning as we were preparing this. Brown Schuler, defensive lineman from Atlanta, Georgia. He leads your elevator scoop, and it's a down arrow.
Well, it's in alphabetical order, and his last name's Brown.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. I said no math and no alphabet. Come on, man.
I was going to say, it doesn't sound like you're pretty good with, I don't even know, is that English? I mean...
Those hyphenated names kind of confused me, right? I was thinking Heath Schuler when I saw it, to be honest. That was the name I saw when you posted that to me.
Yeah, it's been a long time since he was a recruit.
Tell me, he committed to Clemson, so he's off the board. Go on. Let's go through it here individually. You provide as much as you can without violating premium scoop laws. But alphabetically, go through it. What is important for North Carolina? What is not important for North Carolina here?
Yeah, you mentioned having Brown Schuler, 4-star defensive lineman from Atlanta, committed to Clemson. He visited North Carolina, I think, at least twice last summer, came back for a game. There was some, I don't know. I never felt like North Carolina had great traction. He made a lot of visits a lot of different places. And I think those who follow that recruitment really closely always felt like he was going to end up in Clemson, and that's where he did. Do you want me to just go one by one down this list, I guess?
Yep, and I'll interrupt you with questions.
All right, so I guess the main one here, I think that would be the interesting topic, Ethan Callaway, in-state offensive lineman. He named a top 8, Georgia, Florida State, Tennessee, Florida, North Carolina, LSU, Auburn, and Penn State. For me, besides North Carolina being included, what surprised me the most was that NC State was not, just because NC State was kind of on him before really anybody else. They were among the first schools to offer him, and he visited a bunch. So for NC State not to be in there, that's pretty significant to me. North Carolina seemed to make some good progress when he visited for, I think it was the April 1st spring scrimmage. So UNC seemed like, we ran a story, so check that out to kind of get, get his exact quotes or whatever. But I thought North Carolina made some good progress with it. But I still kind of feel like, and his offer list kind of suggests, or his top 8 kind of suggests that, this is a kid who definitely wants a quote unquote, football school, national school. I mean, Georgia, Florida State, Tennessee, Florida, LSU, Auburn, Penn State. I mean, these are all either SEC school. Well, yeah, SEC schools that are known as football schools, and a lot of them are, some level of playoff contender. Any
You know,
thoughts?
well, it's funny. I mean, Lake Norman, there's quite a few. That can be a Carolina area there, of
Mm-hmm.
course. Lake Norman, where certain quarterbacks' family may be living in that vicinity and all. But when I'm looking at it here, you know, here's my first thought when I see lists, especially big list, is Sherelle McMillan on the basketball side. Don always talks about the list in the list within the list.
Mm-hmm.
English language is hard today. Uh, does that apply really in football to you? Have you seen that where guys will list 5, 7, 8 schools like Callaway has, but in realistically, there's probably 2 or 3 or 4 maybe.
Yeah, I definitely think that, especially earlier on in the process, and especially when a kid comes out with like a top 12, and so, but with Callaway, I believe he's made at least one visit and potentially multiple visits to the majority of these schools. So I don't know if I'm sure in his mind now he's really good about, or at least he'll tell you, that things are pretty even and that sort of thing. But I tend to think that most kids, if they have a top 8, there is a list within it. I think it's hard to discern that from him just because he's visited all these schools. A lot of times they come out the top 8 and have only visited 3 or 4 of them, or have visited 3 or 4 of them multiple times. I don't think that's the case with this recruitment.
So when I look at Callaway, I see a 6'7", 300-pound guy, nationally top 200 kid, or right around the age, or right around that area, number 4 in North Carolina. Don, he projects. He's listed as a 4-star. This is the type, and Randy Clements is on him. I feel like this is the type offensive line recruitments that North Carolina needs to figure out how to win. How realistic is it for guys from that area of the state to battle, for North Carolina to battle all the big boys in that?
I mean, you got to take a case by case situation, to be honest. And I think with this recruitment in general, the first stage is to get onto this list, which North Carolina has done, and not to beat down NC State. But NC State didn't, and North Carolina is the only in-state school, only school in the Carolinas that made it. A lot of these schools are outside of decent driving range. But anyway, and so the next step is to get one of those official visits. Now, this is where that rule we talked about, I guess it was last week, that the NCAA passed kind of just screws everything up for us. But if his intentions are, and that's as far as I know, the last time I talked to him, this was his intention, to commit during the summer, he won't get those additional official visits until the fall. So for all intents and purposes, he's going to have 5 official visits that he's going to take in June. North Carolina's goal next is to secure one of those 5 official visits. And if he throws out the whole they're close by, I can get there whenever I want, I don't need an official visit, I've never found that to be a good sign for any of the local schools, just because one of the things, there's not a whole lot that we can lean on when we're trying to predict where these kids are leaning. But I think I've mentioned it to you before. There's only been 2 situations that I know of, other than that COVID year, the COVID class, that a kid has signed with North Carolina and the kid did not officially visit North Carolina and sign with North Carolina. Chaz Surratt and Devon Simmons, the only 2 examples in my 20 years of covering it. So obviously, if a kid doesn't officially visit North Carolina, it's a good bet that they're not going to end up at UNC. So that's the next goal for North Carolina is to get one of those 5 official visits.
Yeah, and we've seen Armando Bacot say, "Don't visit North Carolina if you don't want to commit." It doesn't work that way as well with the football side of it, but yes, to Don's point there, you got to have them officially visit. You got to get them on campus. You got to get them all the bells and whistles that come with an official visit. You've got Cameron Courtney on there, Virginia guy. He's scheduled a North Carolina official visit. That's a good thing, per what you
Mm-hmm.
were just talking about.
Yeah.
He's out of Woodbridge, Virginia. And then looking down the list, Caden Jones from Christ School, Alabama. Cole Mullins from Mill Creek, Patterson's high school, correct?
Yes.
Uh,
And Aiden Banfield's high school.
Yep, commits to Notre Dame. You got Patterson and Pizanski on there. Uh, Mr. Sanders from Bergen Catholic, another guy with an official visit. And
Mm-hmm.
then Curtis Simpson out of Kings Mountain. On the recruiting side of it, you talked about the COVID class and all. I kind of want to spin off the elevator. And again, folks, if you're looking for the weekly scoop, it's not going to be there. So this is your weekly scoop.
Keep rubbing that in.
Yeah, so check it out. Don, Don's, sometimes you got to have a week off. And those scoop, for folks that don't understand, Don, how long do you spend putting together a scoop? Serious question.
Yeah, I mean, I it's a lot. I'm actually already have started next week's scoop. Now, the meat of it, I'm going to write over the weekend and on Monday, particularly Monday night. I take my daughter. Usually Monday night, she has a 2-hour workout. I go to the gym with her, and I have my little corner I sit in, plug my laptop in, and I'm working on the scoop for about 2 hours on Monday night, and then obviously Tuesday. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot of time that is spent on it. It's multiple days, and it's something that definitely gets started a week prior to its actual posting.
Yeah, and phone calls and
Yeah.
research and
Yes.
interviews and all. So, I mean, the weekly scoop is a weekly for a reason because it takes that long to put it together. And then, never mind all the articles. You've got articles on the site, but Jordan Ship and other guys that are visiting, or Carolina's moved up that elevator or down that elevator. It's just a non ending thing for Don. And that's why Sweatshirt says it all. There is no off season. Don, let's turn to, you mentioned something, and I've been wanting to ask you this question, and maybe we've talked about it. I'm not sure if you and your former life talked about it on the other show, but
Wife or
co-
life?
both
Okay.
former life, because this is a new life. We are
This is
we
new
are
life for me.
we are reborn here,
We are.
and just folks listening in the name request. I love the name request. I've got um, a couple in mind, and neither one of them include the word scoop. So look for somebody to come out of the box with a new hat, and it might not be Scoop. But anyway, COVID class. How much of the COVID class, in your mind, A, has led to just the nature of it, misevaluations on kids because it was near impossible to do so, and also how much of that has led to the transfer portal chaos that we see these days? Is it
So
all of it, or most of it, or
well,
none of
so
it?
so what do we consider the COVID class? Because obviously it happened. 2020 was the main part of COVID, I would say, and so that would be the 2021 class. But a lot of those guys, those evaluations were kind of done the prior season, where there was no restrictions. But then you look at the 2022 class, which for at least in-state kids, their season was delayed until the spring. They also in-person stuff was not allowed until it was at June, so they delayed some things. So I feel like it probably, I mean, it impacted both classes, but probably hurt the 2022 class more than the 2021 class. What do you
So,
think?
well, I don't disagree with you, but when is the so for high school football players, when is the prime time for them in the evaluation process? Is it summer before junior season, and then that summer before senior season? That's the prime. If you're going to get noticed, if you're going to get a scholarship offer, that's where it comes from mostly. Would you agree with that?
If I had to pick one, I would say your junior season. And
Ju-
so, yeah, so your junior season, and so the that we do have a winter evaluation period, which doesn't get talked about a whole lot, but that's when a lot of those offers are being extended, and then you know the visits in January and March are pretty big too. So I would say that junior season. But I think
Okay.
that the summer prior to that, prior to junior season, really kind of helps some guys who have a little bit of buzz kind of further cement themselves on the map. But the way that the calendar is now, that summer prior to your senior season, which 10, 15 years ago was a big deal, no longer is when colleges are trying to evaluate that senior class, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you're dealing with COVID, eh, those kids that were juniors when those seasons were either shut down or moved to the spring, um, you get guys that have gotten scholarships that might not ordinarily have gotten scholarships, and vice versa, into schools, into colleges, and then you add in this transfer portal deal,
Yeah.
and we've certainly
Well,
seen how it affects North
that's
Carolina.
the other thing is like, how do we? It's so hard to say this is being impacted by COVID because we actually have thrown a lot into recruiting. You mentioned the transfer portal. You mentioned NIL stuff. All of this, like, so it's hard because how do you separate everything out to determine this is what's impacting things? And the other thing is let's say it is the 2021 class. Those guys are what? I guess they
Third
would
year
be,
players this year.
yeah. So I don't think we've had enough time to. I mean, Drake May was part of that 2021 class. I mean, let's just go through it real quick. Let me get
All right.
Drake real quick. The 2021 class in order of composite ranking is Keyshawn Silver, Drake May, Ra Dilworth, Power Eccles, Javari Ritzy, DeAndre Boykins, Gavin Blackwell, Gabe Stevens, Eli Sutton, Kamaro Edmonds, Dontavius Nash, Bryson Nesbitt, JJ Jones, Kobe Paysour, Dante Belfour, Diego Pounds, Tamir Brown, Caleb Hood, Travion Stevenson. And so really, I mean, I'm looking at this, a lot of starters, a lot of guys who have played a good amount of time. Yes, there are some guys like Keyshawn Silver so far has been a complete bust, had to leave. Robert Dilworth, I think, was more of a fact of the change in defensive scheme and defensive coordinator. Same thing with Gabe Stevens, changing. Those guys I think fit better for Bateman, not so much for Gene Chizik. Eccles, a multi-year starter. Ritzy has been playing since day one. Blackwell is involved in the offense heavily. I mean, there's some transfer outs for sure. Nesbitt, another guy, big time. So let me get your thoughts on that, and then I'll read off the 2022 class.
Well, I think when I'm sitting here trying to justify the portal as misevaluations, but when I listen to that class and the names you ring out, I'm that's pretty solid.
Yeah, that's
That's
a good
pretty
class.
solid production on what they acquired, and the attrition from it. Balfour, Tamir Brown, Silver, and Rara are. It's not much different than any other class, right? Read out the next year.
All right. So, well, let me just one more thing. So, let me just go by. I'm going to list the 4 or 5 stars who, for what didn't pan out. Okay. Silver, Ra Dilworth, Gabe Stevens, Eli Sutton. I know he's still on roster. Kamaro Edmonds, Dontavius Nash, and that's really it. The rest of these guys, so I mean, and the further I go down the list, the further more likely, which is the whole stars don't matter thing kind of goes out the window when you're looking at this. I mean, yes, there are busts that are 4 stars, but they're a lot less likely the further you go down.
And let me push on you just a little bit.
Okay,
I don't know if bust at this point is a fair term, simply because
you're probably
the
right.
guys we
Yes,
talk, yeah, the guys we talk, like, let's be honest, COVID and the effects of COVID, not just on the football field but in life, affected a guy like Silver,
yes,
unlike, well, like anybody else, and that's just the reality of the situation. But also, they're still able to have opportunities to, like Gabe Stevens. Who knows what he'll do? Silver, who knows what he's going to do at Kentucky? Um, but those guys still have opportunities. They certainly didn't perform up to their star ranking or whatever at North Carolina for whatever
Yeah,
reason.
yeah. Using the term "bust" is not fair. I agree. I agree. I'm just trying to differentiate the guys who have already kind of shined and the guys who have yet to shine. Is probably a better use because I hope you mentioned the whole COVID effects. I talked to Silver a lot during his recruitment, and it definitely impacted him. He did not have access to things,
Yep.
and he put on a lot of weight. And he will, I mean, he told me that, he's sitting in the house by himself all day long and lots of food, and that's what he did. And he tried to exercise and all that, but a lot of things were closed for him. He didn't have the opportunities a lot of other kids had. Now you look at the opposite, and this is the next class, but Bo Atkinson, him and his family will tell you, hey, it was the best thing that happened because Bo used all that extra free time to really kind of bulk up and work on his craft, and that helped him put him on North Carolina's radar. But yes, I mean there are a lot of kids that ended up in Silver's category also.
Yeah, and let's make no mistake. My point of the whole thing is that you still have choices to make,
Yeah,
and you can make the most of it. Greg Barnes and I talked to Anson Dorrance, and if folks are listening to this and hadn't listened to the Anson Dorrance interview, at least part one of it, go check it out. Great players don't make excuses. Great players have a different level of drive, no matter the circumstances. So there's a lot played into it. But I still think I go back to what I said just a second ago is that they still have opportunities to come through and live up to their whatever their ranking was. It's just going to be somewhere else
yeah,
for those guys we're talking about. And then when you talk about the next class out, you mentioned Bo Atkinson. I mean, dude's different. He's cut from a different cloth mentally and physically, and he sort of flipped a negative into a positive, and
yeah.
that's a great personality to have. Not a ton of people have it, but for a
But
young
I
football
think though,
player,
I mean, he had, you know, I know his family. I don't know exactly their situation, but I feel like he had a lot of resources that a guy like Keyshawn Silver did not have access to.
all right,
He's in
absolutely,
North Raleigh. Family seems well off. Keyshawn Silver is in Rocky Mount. I think in a rough scenario in general. I don't know specifics. I don't want to speak too much on it, but I just don't think the resources were there. I know that he was having a hard time finding gyms open and all that. Where Atkinson, I think, was had all access to weights and stuff like that from his garage or something along those lines. Or had a
yeah,
friend, I think it was that had like a weight room in his garage or whatever.
yeah.
But do you want to go on to the next one? We read off the next class real quick.
Yeah, go ahead and do it. And before you do that, I will say so folks need to be careful of labeling, and I'm soapboxing a little bit, but labeling situations um, based on any norms that you may accept as um, reality. And so, anyway, I say all that to say this, Don. Go on to the next class. Let's discuss it before we take a break.
Okay. All right. Zach Rice, Travis Shaw, Andre Green, George Pettaway, Omarion Hampton, Sebastian Cheeks, Tayshawn Chapman, Malachi Hamrick, Tyon Holloway, Bo Atkinson, Bryson Jennings, Marcus Allen, Will Hardy, Travion Green, Deuce Caldwell, Connor Harrell, Justin Kanyuk, and that is it.
So, I think I heard one name on there that's not, maybe I missed it, but those guys are still in line to live up to whatever their
Yeah.
situation was. And those guys are going to be big names. Bryson Jennings, I think you said, and
Yeah. He was the one
he's
that transferred
portaled
out
up.
recently.
Yeah, so those guys, it doesn't seem like it affected them. Now, level of competition in high school and all that good stuff may be a different animal, but as far as the effect of COVID, I don't think, just from listening to you read out the names and then comparing that to what I've seen so far, I don't think there was a ton of negative impact on that class.
No, but I think that they've also, in a year, if we revisit this, I'm sure that some of these names, I don't know who, will no longer be on roster for whatever reason.
Right.
I mean, the guys who are actual starters from this group, I guess we could say Hampton. Um, Beyond that, I mean, I guess I mean, Marcus Allen started, and Will Hardy played a ton. And I think he started some games, but that was really it. I mean, a lot of contributors, though, for sure. But definitely still, yeah. I mean, there's still a lot here, but I wouldn't surprise if some of these guys don't see the amount of playing time that they want. That we're talking about a couple of these guys being out,
Yeah.
so it'll be interesting.
Absolutely. Let me take a second and talk about Johnny T-shirt. I almost said Jimmy T-shirt. Johnny T-shirt and JohnnyT-shirt.com. I say it all the time, and it's ingrained in my brain. It needs to be ingrained in your shopping for North Carolina gear. Check them out online at the .com or check them out on East Franklin Street. They're great folks to deal with, great to visit. Walk in there. It's like, memorabilia place. You got everything you could possibly want in store. And they're also great folks, alumni owned and operated. And they got the baseball stuff. They got the soccer stuff. They've got women's soccer kid jerseys, I believe, in there. And like Sean Crowley, shout out to Sean, mentioned if you like women's soccer or have any inclination to talk about it or listen about it, check out the Anson Dorrance Next Level we had. But Johnny T-shirts, our sponsor. They're your friend. You get 10% off if you're an Inside Carolina Premium subscriber. A couple more things. Like this podcast or like this show on YouTube, and also subscribe to YouTube if you haven't. The Inside Carolina YouTube channel is now up over 18,000, and we need to keep pushing it. The goal is to get it to 20,000 before the season starts, and I hope that is a low estimate. But 18,000. Shout out to all the work Gregory Hall did before, John Bowman's doing now, and the rest of the Inside Carolina crew to build that. And I'm rambling on because Mr. Don Callahan is fighting a cold or some sort of sickness.
I'm fighting a cold and my cat who's trying to mess with my cords.
Well,
I don't want to get disconnected in the middle of
if we see like the Christmas tree catch on fire and the cat get roasted, we'll know from there. But Don, sort of looking at, we've talked about the roster management and all that. I'm going to take a question from the chat.
Okay.
Gary Lewis asked, let me see if I can throw it up here.
I saw there was a lot of good questions in there.
Yeah, and Gary, and this is something, and I know, it's always, you always defer team stuff to the beat writers, but do you think, it was interesting, Don Chapman entered the portal, and then Jacurious Conley enters the portal, and then Don Chapman comes out of it. Don't know if that's related. That's above my pay grade. We'll talk to the beat writers tonight on the Beat Live at 9:00. But do you anticipate, and we talked about it last week with Mac's comments, but do you anticipate North Carolina actively recruiting the portal this summer for help in 2023?
Yeah, no, they are definitely looking at the portal. I think that what we have found now and then with the prior window and even before that for North Carolina, because of the academic obstacles that exist and because Mac Brown doesn't want to bring in guys just for depth purposes, want to bring in guys who are going to either become starters or at least compete for playing time, that their pool of potential targets isn't as big as you might think. And so you can't just say, I need a right guard, go in the portal and pull out a right guard. You're almost at the mercy of what's in there. And so at the last time I checked, there were definitely some guys that North Carolina has been in communication with. There's a lot of due diligence that's done before things progress with a target. And as far as I know, at last check, UNC hasn't gotten to a level of where they're seriously recruiting anyone. But there's definitely some feelers out there for sure.
Do me a favor and do our listeners a favor. Describe the due diligence that's done by this staff on high school guys.
So obviously they're monitoring the portal. So once a name comes in there, they're immediately watching film. They have immediate access to all this, all the film. They are, if someone knows someone on that staff that kid was playing on, they'll reach out to them. What's the background? Why are they leaving? That sort of thing. They will
and you're talking about, I said high school guys and I meant portal guys, but yes.
I'm talking that was your question, portal guys, right?
Yeah, well, I didn't say portal, but I meant portal. But yeah,
Okay.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So let's say a kid from Georgia, because a lot of kids from Georgia have ended up in the portal, ends up in the portal. North Carolina watches film, looks good, that sort of thing. You know, I'm sure someone on North Carolina staff knows someone at Georgia. They'll reach out. What's the deal here? Why is he leaving? What's the situation? Tell me about him. That sort of thing. They'll also talk to the recruit. So that's why a lot of times you'll say, this kid will say, well, I've heard from this school, this school, this school, North Carolina, and it hasn't gone anywhere. And because the initial contact typically is kind of, can you hear the cat?
Absolutely.
Oh boy. He is he is such a pain. Um,
Is that the red one?
well, they're both orange, but yeah,
Well, I call them red, but those are the coolest ones. Tomcats.
he
Go
is so
ahead.
bad. But anyway, so reaching out and talking to the recruit is part of that due diligence, trying to see just where their mind's at, what they're looking for, that sort of thing. And then, just kind of, you obviously have to check the academic stuff. That's a big part of it too. Getting a hold of the transcripts, sending it through the admissions department, seeing, are they going to have enough hours to come in, or is there the major that's available, that sort of thing. All the craziness that goes into an actual transfer, because they're, unless things have changed, they are basically under the same rules of, a typical transfer student.
Yeah.
So there's a lot involved that obviously has to occur within a short period of time, and how quickly things need to happen kind of depends on just how coveted that recruit is.
Yeah, I mean, and there are challenges in there. Like
Mm-hmm.
we mentioned all of that plus NIL and all that, but
Mm-hmm.
and they've referred to it as speed dating because guys get in the portal and especially this time of year, you're getting in the portal wherever you are now, you're still in class. They're Carolina's transfer guys are still in class for the most
Yeah.
part, including some that got in the portal earlier. They got to get in the portal, finish up classes, and then they want to get on to where they're going. And the same with North Carolina bringing them in. They want to get them in first semester summer school or as soon as possible to get them ingrained in the culture, ingrained in the program, and then on the depth chart. Because, like you mentioned, they don't want to recruit bodies. I mean,
Yeah.
they need depth in football. You need depth in basketball, of course, but they need guys that can produce. Let me see if there's some other questions in here. Good gracious, man. I'm a dog person. I'm not going to lie to you. My dog had his 12th birthday a couple days ago, and he is,
Tell him I said happy birthday.
I will do it, but he has very little gray, right? The neighbor's dog is like 10, and he looks like an old snowman. My dog is black lab, and he has very little gray in his
Hmm.
beard, and it's pretty impressive. I wish he would have given me some of that.
So if you let your locks grow, how much gray would there be? What's the percentage
Here or on my head?
on
Because
your
I don't
head?
know what would grow.
Would anything grow on your head if you tried?
It would look not good. I ought to do it. I want to be the leatherback guy at the beach. Maybe I'll do that for you one day, and I'll grow it all out and
Okay.
have one of those hats. But it would be mostly gray these days, and it used to be like white blonde. I'm very jealous of people with hair. Let me ask you this question. John Lastgrady, interesting last name. If that is in fact it, how many DL or is North Carolina looking to take in the 2024 class? Not talking about Jack, talking about defensive linemen,
Yeah.
tackles, ends, power ends.
So I think so. A lot of these things are very fluid, which is why I don't like to throw out exact numbers, because then when things go under or over, then people are like, "But you said." So very, very fluid. I think, from what I gather, obviously we got Pizanski committed. You got Janai Norwood committed. I think North Carolina would like to take at least one more. Whether they take a fourth will depend on just kind of what's out there, what's available, and what's kind of transpiring on their roster.
So it's always, yeah. When this is what's always good to me, good to hear from you, is you say, I don't want to get pigeonholed into a number because it is fluid. It could
Yeah.
literally change tomorrow, especially with the transfer portal, as we've seen how it happens. Here today you don't have a need for such and such position. Well,
Yeah.
tomorrow you might, and it's an interesting takeaway. Shout
Or
out to Patrick
or just
Sotis and all those guys.
decisions change. Last class was a good example where North Carolina wanted. I can't remember how many. I remember they wanted a solid number of offensive linemen, and then when some of their options kind of dwindled, they were like, you know what? Let's save these spots. Let's use them in the portal, sort of thing. Just because they had evaluated their roster and felt like it'd be better to go portal for those positions.
Yep, absolutely. So let me throw up a question here, and this is something I don't know if we can answer, but you may be able to. Tyler Woods, without getting too specifics, are academic concerns hurting the 2024 class? With some of the top in-state targets, did things get more strict? How do academics play in your coverage of this stuff? And I don't want to get too specific, but in your coverage of this stuff, is it accurate that it's more difficult to get in North Carolina or not? Very general
Than years
question.
past. From my understanding, no. But there are guys like Terrell Anderson, wide receiver from Grimsley. North Carolina has kind of stopped recruiting him, even though they've offered him during the season because of his academic situation. There's other recruits UNC has offered that UNC stopped recruiting because of their academic situation. And basically, you have the NCAA clearinghouse, or what's it called now? The eligibility center. They have their requirements. North Carolina does have requirements that are higher than that. There is some wiggle room that they have. They have some exceptions and that sort of thing. But these exceptions are only going to be used on guys who are like, 4-star, 5-star quality sort of guys. And there's a lot of schools who don't have those extra requirements North Carolina has. And there's actually schools that have higher than North Carolina. I know people don't want to hear this, but Duke, for example, it's harder to get a football recruit into Duke than it is to get into North Carolina. And there's some others that are similar to that too.
Yep, it is all relative. Brett Weeks asks, should UNC fans be worried about not getting top-tier talent or just don't get caught up in the stars? Therein lies the $64,000 question, Don, that you have to answer.
Yeah, so stars definitely matter. I'm not going to say that they don't matter. Can you win without the stars? Can you compete for ACC championships without the stars? Sure, absolutely. I mean, Wake Forest, if you really look back in the last 20 years, Wake Forest has put together some really good football teams with different coaches. They aren't, I don't know if I have never researched Wake Forest's rankings, but I would guess they have never landed in the top 25 of any class. But yet, if you look at what Wake Forest has done, they have played they played for the ACC championship, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And they
won it, didn't they?
Yeah, I'm thinking, yeah, I feel like, yeah.
I
And
try to
so,
forget those things, but yeah.
they've had some good programs, and they've done it with 3-star guys. So it definitely can be done. Obviously, they're doing extra. They're relying a lot on their evaluations, because they're taking guys that basically other Power 5 schools don't want. There's other examples of programs that win. Now, are you going to win the national championship? No. But I mean, I think if we're being honest, we gotta crawl before we walk, sort of thing. And North Carolina has to be a regular contender for the ACC championship before we're talking about that. So I think, if you're getting high 3-star guys, I don't think it's the end of the world, as long as those evaluations match up. Because really, the way the high 3-star is supposed to translate, and this is not 100%, but this is supposed to translate. It's supposed to translate into all ACC caliber players. If you added a bunch of all ACC caliber players to your roster, then yeah, you're going to win a good amount of games, and you have the potential to compete for the ACC championship. It's just going beyond that. It's going to be a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, and Wake Forest won in 2006, played in 2007 Orange Bowl. Carlton Vanaway on the message board or on
But
the
even
chat.
more recently, while they haven't necessarily played for, they've had some really good programs.
Yeah, and they're always pretty decent program.
Yeah.
Above, a little bit above average in the ACC. and they're obviously a pain to play against for many of the ACC teams, North Carolina included.
Yes.
A couple more questions, and I was trying to think of some. I was waiting for the chat to pop with some good ones, but let me ask you this: we had a debate in the baseball press box about baseball movies. And I even got Coach Forbes, Scott Forbes, to chime in on his. Give me the best. Well, I'm going to give somebody the opportunity to get one more question in before we get out of here. Give me the best football movie, Don. Your best football movie.
My best football movie. Wow, that's a great
And if you
question.
say Rudy or some mess like that, I'm deleting the podcast.
Oh man, I don't even know. They're all kind of cheesy to me. I mean, I'm trying to think what would be a good one. You know,
Any Given Sunday is pretty good.
or what about Brian's song? I guess you want to get sappy.
Oh yeah.
But that probably falls into the Rudy category. What you said? Wait, you said football movies, right? Not sports.
Yeah, we can do sports, but I figured since this is
Well, if we're
football
doing sports,
recruiting,
we got to do Rocky, right?
oh Lordy mercy. I suppose so. Well, no, we'll go football. Give me a football movie. Come on, man. Quick.
Name some football movies.
I don't know. Any Given Sunday.
It's all right.
You didn't like that movie?
Mm.
Come on, man. You're the expert.
I just don't. I just can't think of any. Little
We're gonna
Giants.
here. Here's what we remember. The Titans probably top of the list,
Okay,
close
yeah.
to the top of the
Remember
list.
Titans, good movie. Yeah.
There's so many great
Okay,
quotes out of that.
I would go number one with that one until I can hear another one that I forgot about.
The
What else?
program, I remember that. Somebody mentioned the program in the chat. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm on the thread on the message board. Folks, chime in with your top movies, top football movies, and we're going to have a list next week of our top of the board's top football movies. Friday Night Lights is
Top
good,
five.
but like the top five. But the edited version, isn't Friday Night Lights the one where they lay down in the middle of the road and did that stupid
That wasn't
hazing
that.
deal?
Wasn't that the one? That was. I don't think that's Friday Night Lights. I think that was. Was it?
And then they edited it out later. I can't remember. Anyway, I'm showing my age. Not
Um,
because it was a
what's the
long
one
time
with
ago, just because I
the
can't
guy from
remember.
Dawson's Creek and he threw the
Uh,
football? The one time he had accuracy, and the one time
You
he.
mentioning that Dawson's Creek is so perfect with the cat meowing. I mean, that's the program, Gina Vaughn said, where they lay down in the road, I
Is that the
think.
program? Okay.
Anyway, a lot of good stuff, a lot of stuff to talk about, a lot of stuff we have talked about. But
So
I'm
top
on
five football movies. Is that what we're
top
doing?
five, yep, top five football movies for next week's
All right.
show. Chime in on the message boards. You can hit up at Twitter, however you want to get it to us. Get them on there. And also, I'm going to have a decision, or we're going to have a decision on the name of this show come next week. I'm leaning towards Noon Dish. Shout out to who brought it to my attention. That's the one I'm leaning towards. Tell me why it shouldn't be Noon Dish. Don, you have a choice. We'll go through the list at some point. But next week, we're going to unveil the real name, unveil who gets the Inside Carolina hat, if that's even a thing. Might let Don sign it and ruin it. But we will. We're going to get out of here now. Anything left, Don, on the Scoop Live for
Is
this
there
week,
any
April
other
26th?
questions in here that we want to answer real quickly, like quick hitters? Let's see.
Can you name 10 TCU Horned Frogs from the championship game? I can't even name the quarterback's name at the moment.
Did TCU even score 10 points?
Yeah, really. I can
I
name one
actually,
per name.
I don't want to bring this up because I don't want you to get, jealous. But I actually went to Ross Martin's house for that.
You went to Ross's house. I've never been to Ross's house. I asked him where he lived. He wouldn't tell me. Which,
John Bowman was there also, and there's a couple other people. And yeah, thankfully the score made it easy for me to leave at halftime.
he gave you your out
Yeah,
immediately.
I mean that was ugly.
That is hilarious. Yes, it was. Yeah, that was a beatdown of epic proportion. I guess the question is, would you want to play in that game and get smoked, or never play in that game? For me, as a somebody that watches a team or whatever, I'd rather lose like that than have never played in it before. Kind of like the
Yeah,
love, rather love and lost than never loved before. What do you
yeah.
think?
Well, especially for you because you're a big traveler, so you would go down. Where was that? That was in California somewhere, right?
Yeah,
Like
I
San
think
Diego
so.
or something like that.
I would
So
100% want to be in it.
yeah, so you would go. and that would be a big part of the experience for you. So that would make sense on why you would want to be in it. I don't know. I think I would rather playing it and get blown out, but
That's another question for the chat. Hit us up in the message boards.
what's so irritating was that Ohio State, if they would have made a freaking field goal, they would have been in it.
Oh, yeah.
And Michigan just completely crapped the bed. But
yeah. That's how it works.
That is
That's
how it works.
That's how college football works. I'll often talk about how many times has a player transferred out of North Carolina and
So
done
there was
something.
actually, let me throw this out there real quick. So right before that, I was at a family member's house and they had a pool outside, and there was basically a bet, and one person was going to jump in if that field goal was missed. The other person was going to jump in if that field goal was made. I had to jump in the cold water.
Nice. Well, I can tell you what, cold water is no fun. I found
That's
that
right.
out at the Carolina Notre Dame game. The St. Joseph River in South Bend is cold in November. That's another story to tell for another day. Spin the Scoop Live next week. New name next week. More Don Callahan next week. Top 5 football movies. We need folks to come through. I might even watch them and give a breakdown. I've seen most of them, but I have to rewatch them. But we will be back next week, Wednesday at noon. I'll probably be at the beach. So you ask about the gray hair, Don. There's probably going to be a lot of tan going on here, and so it'll be looking good. And to Preston, we will change clothes when we do podcasts. Like I said, I'm retired. I don't change much.
I only own like 3 shirts. So
really, I got 2 t-shirts and a couple sweatshirts and a couple pairs of shorts, and even less underwear. So that's Don Callahan. I'm Tommy Ashley. It's been the Scoop Live. Shout out to everybody that's been here, the regulars and the newbies. Like, review, rate us, all that good stuff, and check us out on InsideCarolina.com. Thank you, Don. We'll see you next week.